The knock came just before midnight, a sharp, urgent sound against the steady drumming of the rain. When Jack, a single father weary from a long shift, opened the door, the porch light framed a girl who couldn't have been more than 7. She was soaked to the bone, her tiny hands clutching a one-eyed teddy bear as if it were a shield. I think I'm supposed to be here," she said, her voice a fragile whisper against the storm. He led her into the warmth of the house, his mind struggling to catch up. As he wrapped a towel around her shoulders, his gaze fell upon the bear. There, on its worn paw, were 3 words in faded blue embroidery that made the air freeze in his lungs. Jack R. Dean, it was his name. A disorienting wave of vertigo washed over him. He was the grown man, she the vulnerable child, yet he was the one who felt utterly powerless, a pawn in a game he didn't understand. He knelt down, his voice gentle. "Who sent you here, little one?" "My mommy," she answered, looking at him with unnervingly familiar eyes. "She told me if she was ever gone, I had to find the man from the Iron Bridge." The firm. Iron Bridge. The phrase struck him not as a memory, but as a physical blow, echoing with the screech of metal and the shattering of glass from 5 years ago. It was the place that had taken his wife from him. As she looked up, a glint of silver caught his eye. A delicate chain around her neck held a single ornate key-shaped pendant. Etched into its surface were 2 words. Haven 12. The questions coiled in the silence of the room, sharp and menacing. Who was this child, and why had she arrived tonight, carrying keys to a past he thought he had buried forever? The house settled into a heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window panes and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Jack watched the little girl, who he now knew was named Lily, as she sat curled on his worn leather armchair. She cradled the mug of hot chocolate in her small hands, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold that still clung to her clothes. Her gaze was distant, lost in a world only she could see. The teddy bear, its fur matted and one eye missing, sat beside her like a silent guardian, the name tag on its paw seeming to glow under the dim lamplight. To Jack R. The letters were embroidered in a simple, earnest stitch, a style that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. He had spent the last hour trying to place it, searching the archives of his memory for a time he might have given such a gift, but came up empty. He had called the local police precinct, reporting a lost child, but omitting the eerie details. An officer had promised to send a patrol car to swing by the neighborhood, but the storm was worsening, and non-emergency calls were piling up. For now, he and Lily were in a bubble of shared uncertainty. He tried to coax more information from her, his voice gentle so as not to spook her. He asked about her mother, her school, the color of her house, but her answers were fragmented, whispered between sips of chocolate. She remembered a park with a red slide, and her mother's hand, warm and safe, before it was gone. The only solid pieces of her memory were the 2 things she had repeated upon arrival: the Iron Bridge and the man who had saved her mother. This led Jack down a path he had long tried to avoid, a path that led directly to the worst night of his life. He instinctively concluded that this had to be the child of the woman he had pulled from the submerged vehicle 5 years ago. He remembered the chaos of that night, the blinding headlights cutting through the deluge, the horrifying screech of tires on wet asphalt, and the final, sickening crunch of metal against the bridge's railing. His wife, Sarah, had been in the car behind the one that went over. While he was down in the cold, rushing water, fighting to free a stranger from a sinking wreck, another driver had lost control, and Sarah's life had been extinguished in an instant. He had saved one life and lost the one that meant everything. He never saw the woman he rescued again. She was rushed to the hospital while he was left to identify his wife. In the fog of grief that followed, he never learned her name, never sought her out. Perhaps he now thought she had finally sought him out, sending her daughter as a strange, nocturnal messenger. The girl, Lily, shivered slightly, pulling him from his reverie. He retrieved a thick wool blanket from the linen closet, the scent of cedar and disuse clinging to it. As he wrapped it around her small shoulders, he noticed the necklace again. The key pendant lay against her collarbone, a piece of silver so detailed it seemed important. Haven 12, he murmured to himself, the words feeling alien on his tongue. It sounded like an address, or maybe a code. He asked Lily about it, but she simply touched it with her fingertips, a gesture of comfort. "Mommy gave it to me," she whispered. "She said it keeps secrets safe." The answer provided no clarity, only adding another layer to the deepening enigma. He looked from the key around her neck to the bear in her lap, feeling like he was being presented with pieces of a puzzle he didn't know he was meant to solve. He carried the now drowsy child to the spare bedroom, a room that had remained largely untouched since Sarah's passing. He tucked her into bed, the oversized quilt swallowing her small frame. She was asleep almost instantly, her breathing soft and even, the picture of innocence. But her presence in his house felt momentous, a stone tossed into the still, dark waters of his life. He returned to the living room and picked up the teddy bear she had left on the armchair. He ran his thumb over the stitched name, to Jack R. The R stood for Roberts, his last name. It was undeniably meant for him. He tried to connect it to the woman from the accident, but it made no sense. Why would a stranger he met for a few terrifying minutes have a gift made for him? And why send her daughter with it 5 years later, in the middle of the night? The logic was flawed, brittle. The red herring was tempting. It was the only explanation that made any sense. But a deeper instinct told him it was wrong. He sank into his own chair, the bear in his hands, and stared into the dying embers of the fireplace, the girl's words about the bridge echoing in his mind, not as a clue, but as a ghost from a past that was suddenly, terrifyingly, present. Morning arrived not with sunlight, but with a quiet, gray stillness that seeped through the windows, the world outside washed clean by the night's storm. Jack had dozed off in the armchair, the old teddy bear still resting in his lap. He awoke with a crick in his neck and the immediate, jarring memory of the small guest asleep in the other room. The house felt different, occupied by a presence that was both a mystery and a responsibility. He found Lily already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table and watching a lone sparrow peck at seeds on the bird feeder outside. She seemed less like a lost child and more like a miniature philosopher contemplating the morning, her bare feet dangling inches above the floor. The police had called back around dawn. With no missing child reports matching her description, their hands were tied. They advised him to wait, to see if a frantic parent made a report later in the day. Waiting felt like an abdication of duty. He made pancakes, moving with a practiced quietness honed by years of living alone. The familiar ritual grounded him, the whisking of batter, the sizzle of the griddle, the sweet smell of maple syrup. He placed a plate in front of Lily, and she gave him a small, hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As they ate in companionable silence, he decided to try again, his tone conversational, not interrogative. He asked about her favorite cartoons, her favorite color, trying to build a bridge of normalcy into her strange and fractured world. It was during this gentle exchange that the first real clue emerged, dropped as casually as a crumb from the table. When he asked where her mother worked, Lily paused, a thoughtful frown on her face. "She helps fix things," Lily said, "at a big white building with lots of windows. A safe place. St. Haven." The name struck Jack with the force of a physical impact. St. Haven Hospital. He hadn't just heard of it. He had spent nearly a decade of his life walking its halls, not as a doctor or a patient, but as a maintenance engineer. He knew its labyrinthine basement, the complex network of pipes and wires that were the building's lifeblood. He had left that job shortly after Sarah's death, the daily commute past the iron bridge becoming an unbearable reminder of his loss. The hospital was a part of a past he had deliberately walled off. Now, this child had brought it back, not as a memory, but as a vital clue. He pictured the sprawling white facility, a place of healing and sickness, of beginnings and endings. The woman he'd saved from the river. Had she been taken there? It was the most logical destination from the site of the crash. Later, while Jack cleaned the kitchen, he gave Lily a stack of paper and a box of old crayons he'd found in a drawer, hoping the simple act of drawing might occupy her. She settled on the living room rug, completely absorbed. For a long while, the only sound was the soft, waxy scratch of crayon on paper. Curiosity eventually got the better of him, and he walked over to see what she was creating. The pages weren't filled with the usual childhood subjects of houses, sons, or stick figure families. Instead, every single sheet was covered with the same peculiar symbol, drawn over and over again in different colors. It was a bird in flight, elegantly rendered for a child her age, but with one stark, deliberate flaw. One of its wings was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. He knelt beside her, pointing to the drawing. "That's a very special bird," he said softly. "What is it?" Lily didn't look up from her work. "It's Mommy's picture," she explained, her voice low and serious. "It's the fallen angel. She said it watches over us." The name sent a shiver down his spine. The fallen angel. It sounded less like a picture and more like a premonition or a symbol for something damaged. This was plant number 3, the recurring, unsettling logo of a broken wing. He had never seen it before, yet it felt strangely significant, like a piece of a foreign language he was suddenly expected to understand. It was too specific, too stylized to be a child's random doodle. It was a logo, a brand, an insignia of some kind, and it was deeply ingrained in this little girl's mind. The pieces were beginning to form a disquieting mosaic in his mind. The teddy bear with his name, the necklace with its cryptic key, the mention of St. Haven, and now this symbol of a broken bird. The theory that she was simply the daughter of the woman he had rescued felt increasingly thin, unable to bear the weight of these strange, interconnected details. This wasn't a simple case of a lost child stumbling upon a stranger's door. It was something else entirely, a message being delivered in installments by a 7-year-old oracle. He knew then that the local police, with their forms and procedures, would be of no use. This was his puzzle to solve. The path forward led back to a place he had abandoned, back to the sterile corridors and hidden file rooms of St. Haven. He had to go there, to pull on the threads of his own past, and see if they were tied to this little girl's future. Returning to St. Haven Hospital was like stepping into a photograph of a life that was no longer here. The scent was the first thing to hit him. That unique, sterile blend of antiseptic, floor polish, and the faint underlying aroma of human fragility. He had arranged for a friend to watch Lily for the afternoon, but the image of her small face as he left, her expression one of quiet trust, propelled him forward. He couldn't leave her in limbo. He walked the familiar, polished linoleum corridors, his footsteps echoing with a ghostly familiarity. The hum of the ventilation system, the distant, gentle chime of a nurse's call button. These were sounds he had once known as intimately as his own heartbeat. Now they felt alien, a soundtrack from a different man's existence. He navigated the building on instinct, his body remembering the turns and shortcuts his mind had tried to bury for the last 5 years. His destination was the hospital's records archive, a cavernous, climate-controlled room in the basement, a library of human stories bound in manila folders. He found Margaret, the head archivist, exactly where he had left her 5 years ago, perched on a stool behind a mountain of paperwork, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She was a woman for whom time seemed to move at a different, more deliberate pace. Her face broke into a warm, crinkled smile when she saw him. "Jack Roberts," she said, her voice raspy from disuse. "I'll be. I thought you'd vanished off the face of the earth." He gave her a tired smile, explaining he needed a favor, a look at some old files from a specific night 5 years back. He gave her the date of the accident at the Iron Bridge, framing it as a personal matter, a loose end he felt compelled to tie up. Margaret, who had sent a condolence card after Sarah's death that he still kept, simply nodded, her eyes full of an unspoken understanding. She led him into the stacks, the rolling shelves groaning in protest as she turned a heavy crank. "Accident reports from that quarter," she pointed. "Knock yourself out. Just don't make a mess of my system." He pulled the heavy binders, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from an overhead bulb. The official police report was clipped to the front of the section. It was clinical, brief, and utterly wrong. It listed a single vehicle, a sedan, losing control on the wet road and plunging into the river. Driver error. Case closed. There was no mention of a second collision, no reference to Sarah's car being struck. It was as if her death, the central cataclysm of his life, had been relegated to a footnote, or worse, erased entirely. A cold anger began to coil in his gut. This wasn't an oversight. It was a fabrication. He pushed past the police report and delved into the hospital's own intake logs for that night. He scanned the names, looking for a Jane Doe or an unidentified female admitted with injuries consistent with a car crash and near drowning. And then he found her. A patient admitted with hypothermia and minor contusions, brought in from the Iron Bridge. Her name was listed as Clara Rowe. The file for Clara Rowe was unnervingly thin. It contained a few pages of vitals, a doctor's notes describing her as disoriented but physically stable, and a discharge form signed 3 days later. The address she had given was a post office box in a neighboring state. A small, handwritten note at the bottom from a social worker stated that follow-up calls went unanswered. She had, for all official purposes, disappeared after leaving the hospital's care. Jack felt a surge of frustration. It was another dead end. He was about to close the folder when his fingers brushed against something thick tucked inside the back flap. It wasn't a medical document. It was a photograph, small and slightly dog-eared, the kind one keeps in a wallet. It must have fallen from her clothes and been placed in her file for safekeeping. The photo showed Clara, looking exhausted, but with a soft smile on her lips, propped up on a hospital bed. In her arms, she was holding a newborn baby, tightly swaddled in a simple white blanket. He stared at the image, his heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The baby in the photograph. Could it be Lily? The timeline fit. If Clara had given birth around the time of the accident, Lily would be about 5 years old now. He thought of the little girl he'd left at his friend's house, her solemn eyes and the strange, broken-winged bird she drew. As he focused on the infant's face in the picture, a different, more powerful realization struck him, an emotional current that bypassed all logic and went straight to his core. It wasn't just that the baby could be Lily, it was that the baby's features, the delicate curve of her brow and the shape of her tiny mouth, mirrored another face etched permanently in his memory. They mirrored Sarah's. He suddenly felt the room tilt, the dusty air growing thick and hard to breathe. He looked at Clara's face in the photo again, then summoned the image of Lily from his mind. Then, superimposed over both, was the face of his wife. And then came the undeniable, heart-stopping connection. Lily had Sarah's eyes. It was a resemblance so clear, so profound, he couldn't believe he hadn't seen it before. The red herring of her being the rescued woman's child was gone, replaced by a truth that was infinitely more complex and terrifying. This little girl wasn't a stranger's daughter. Somehow, impossibly, she was connected to him, to Sarah, in a way that defied every law of nature he understood. The case of the lost child had just become the mystery of his own life. Jack drove home from the hospital in a daze, the city lights blurring into long, indistinct streaks of color. The photograph was a brand on his mind, a fixed image he couldn't blink away. Clara Rowe, the infant, and the undeniable ghost of his wife looking back at him through the child's eyes. When he walked through his front door, his friend was on the couch reading a magazine while Lily was asleep on the floor, surrounded by a flock of her broken-winged birds. Seeing her there, so peaceful and small, sent a protective ache through his chest. This was no longer about helping a stranger's lost child. This was about unearthing a piece of his own history, a history he thought had been sealed shut 5 years ago. He thanked his friend, who left with a concerned glance, and gently lifted Lily, carrying her back to the spare room. As he tucked her in, he studied her face in the soft glow of the hallway light, tracing the lines of her features with his eyes, seeing Sarah in the curve of her cheek, in the delicate set of her jaw. The resemblance was so profound, it was a physical pain, a love and a loss all tangled together. The next morning, as he was collecting the mail from the slot in his front door, a single plain white envelope fell to the floor. It was different from the bills and junk mail. It had no stamp, no postmark, and no return address. His name, Jack Roberts, was typed in a simple generic font on the front. A cold sense of unease washed over him as he tore it open. Inside, there was no letter, only a small, folded piece of paper and a single ornate silver key. The key was cold and heavy in his palm. It was an exact match for the pendant hanging around Lily's neck. He unfolded the paper. There were only typed words, a stark command on the empty page. Haven 12. Where the truth is locked. It was a confirmation and a challenge, a map to a destination he didn't know he was looking for. This was the payoff for the clue Lily had been wearing all along, the purpose of the small, silver object he had dismissed as a simple piece of jewelry. His first instinct was to call the police, to hand over this strange, anonymous threat. But what would he tell them? That a lost girl who looked like his dead wife appeared at his door, followed by a cryptic message and a key. They would think he was losing his mind. He looked at the key in his hand, and then at Lily, who was now in the living room, quietly stacking blocks. The truth, whatever it was connected to her. It was her past, and by some impossible twist of fate, it had become his future. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he couldn't leave her behind. She wasn't just a part of this mystery. She was the key to unlocking it, in more ways than one. He knelt in front of her. "Lily," he said gently, "do you know a place called the Haven?" She looked at him, her expression blank for a moment, and then a flicker of something, not quite memory, passed through her eyes. She simply nodded. "It's a sleepy house," she said, as if reciting a line from a forgotten fairy tale. The Haven Apartments was a tired, 3-story brick building on the other side of town, nestled in a neighborhood of old, forgotten houses. It had an air of quiet dignity, a place where people kept to themselves, where secrets could fester undisturbed behind closed doors. Jack held Lily's hand, the small key now in his pocket feeling like a talisman. He found apartment 12 at the end of a dimly lit hallway on the 2nd floor. The air was still, and smelled of dust and old wood. He paused at the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. He pushed the door open, revealing a room shrouded in shadows, the furniture covered in white dust cloths like sleeping ghosts. It was a place frozen in time, a shrine to a life abruptly abandoned. He stepped inside, Lily clinging to his leg, her eyes wide with a strange mix of fear and familiarity. The apartment was small and meticulously neat beneath the layers of dust. It was clear that this was Clara Rowe's home. A half-finished cup of tea sat on a coaster by the sofa. A stack of engineering textbooks lay on a small desk in the corner. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet, was a child's drawing, a single, large bird with a broken wing. Jack moved through the space slowly, methodically, not sure what he was searching for. He opened closets, looked through drawers, seeking a diary, a letter, anything that could explain the connection between Clara, Lily, and his wife, Sarah. He found nothing but clothes, dishes, and the mundane artifacts of a quiet life. Then he saw it. A small wooden chest at the foot of the bed, the only object in the room not covered by a sheet. It was locked. He tried the key from the door, but it didn't fit. Frustrated, he was about to give up when Lily, who had been silently trailing him, walked over to her own necklace, unclasped it, and held the key pendant up to him. "This one," she said. With a tremor in his hands, he took the tiny key from her. It slid perfectly into the chest's small lock. He lifted the lid. The chest was mostly empty, save for a few bundled stacks of official-looking documents and, sitting right on top, a single CD-ROM in a clear plastic sleeve. There was no label, no title, but drawn directly onto the silver surface of the disc, in black permanent marker, was the unmistakable symbol he now knew so well. It was the bird with the broken wing, the fallen angel. This was plant number 5, a new and modern clue in this analog mystery. He picked up the disc, its smooth, cool surface feeling impossibly heavy. This was it. This had to be the truth that the note had promised. He looked from the disc in his hand to the small girl standing beside him, the rightful owner of the key, the silent keeper of secrets she didn't even know she held. He now had the lock, the key, and the box. All that was left was to find the machine that could make it speak. Jack's house was no longer equipped for the technology of the past. He searched through old boxes in the attic, the air thick with the smell of dust and decaying paper, until he finally found it. An old, heavy laptop from his college days, a relic from a time before everything was stored in a cloud. He blew a layer of dust from its surface and prayed it would still work. The machine whirred to life with a loud, protesting groan. Downstairs, he set it up on the kitchen table, Lily watching him with a silent, solemn curiosity. He slid the disc into the tray. The drive spun, chattered, and then, after an agonizingly long moment, an icon appeared on the screen. He double-clicked. The video player opened, and a woman's face filled the grainy frame. It was Clara Rowe, the woman from the photograph, but she looked different here. Her face pale and strained, dark circles under her eyes, a desperate urgency in her expression. The background was a plain, anonymous wall. She was speaking directly to the camera, to him. "If you are watching this," she began, her voice steady but laced with a tremor of fear, "it means I failed. It means they found me, or something has gone terribly wrong." She took a deep, shuddering breath and looked away from the lens for a second, gathering herself. "My name is Clara Rowe. I was a junior structural engineer with Apex Bridge Corporation, the firm that designed and built the Northwood Iron Bridge. I was proud of that project. It was my first major assignment out of school, but I found something, a mistake, a fatal one." She held up a document to the camera, a technical schematic covered in red circles and frantic notations. The procurement reports were falsified. The steel alloys used for the primary support trusses were substandard, a cheaper grade than specified. Under conditions of high stress, like heavy commercial traffic combined with extreme weather, they were prone to catastrophic failure. I ran the simulations 100 times. The bridge wasn't just unsafe, it was a time bomb. Jack leaned closer to the screen, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. He felt Lily's small hand creep into his, her touch a tiny anchor in the rising storm of revelation. "I took my findings to my supervisor," Clara continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He told me to be a team player. My project director told me my calculations were flawed, that I was inexperienced. But then he offered me a promotion, a bonus, hush money. When I refused, the threats started. Subtle at first, then not so subtle. I was told my career would be over, that I would be personally liable for slandering the firm. They made me sign off on the final inspection report. They buried my data. They chose profits over lives. She paused, and for the first time, tears welled in her eyes, born of rage and helplessness. That bridge was a monument to their greed, and my signature was on the cornerstone. The video flickered. When her face returned, her expression had changed. The professional fear was gone, replaced by a deep, personal anguish that twisted her features. This was the moment the story cracked open, the point where the mystery of a stranger became the tragedy of his own family. "I couldn't live with it," she said, her voice breaking. "There was only one person in the world I ever trusted, the only one who ever stood up for me. My older sister." She looked directly into the camera, her gaze seeming to pierce through the screen, through the years, and find him. "Her name was Sarah Roberts, your wife." The air left Jack's lungs in a single, silent gasp. His entire world tilted on its axis. Sarah had a sister, an estranged sister, he now vaguely recalled from the earliest days of their relationship. A fight, a falling out years before he met her, a topic Sarah always shut down with a sad, final firmness. It was a piece of her life he never knew, a door she had kept permanently closed. This was the midpoint reversal. Clara was not a stranger. Lily was not a stranger's child. She was Sarah's sister, and Lily was his niece. "I was driving to your house that night," Clara confessed, the words tumbling out now. "I was going to tell Sarah and you everything. I was finally ready to ask for help. The rain was so heavy, someone was following me. A dark sedan. It had been for 2 days. I panicked. I drove faster and I lost control. On the bridge. My bridge." The monstrous, cosmic irony of it crashed down on him. She had crashed on the very monument of her guilt while racing to confess it. He had saved his wife's sister without even knowing who she was. "And that teddy bear," Clara said, as if sensing his next question. "This was payoff number 4. The one I gave my Lily. Sarah made that for me when we were teenagers, after the fight that tore us apart. She mailed it to me years later with a note that said, 'If you ever need a haven, find Jack. He's the best man I know.' I stitched his name on it myself, a message in a bottle for my daughter. I told her, 'If anything happens to Mommy, you find the man who saved me. You find Jack R.' I was sending her to the only family she had left." The video ended. The screen went black, but Clara's face remained, seared into his mind. He looked down at Lily, who was staring at the blank screen, her expression unreadable. All the pieces slammed into place. The bear, the key to a haven, the resemblance to Sarah. It was a desperate, brilliant contingency plan laid out by a terrified mother. A wave of ice-cold fury washed over him, displacing the shock. The cover-up hadn't just led to a faulty bridge. It had led to Sarah's death. The second car, the one that had hit hers, wasn't an accident. It was all connected. A profound power shift occurred within him. He was no longer a bewildered man helping a lost child. He was an uncle, a protector, the last line of defense for his wife's blood. The mystery was solved, but a mission had just begun. This was not just about Clara's truth anymore. This was for Sarah. He reached out and closed the laptop, the definitive click echoing in the silent kitchen. He knew exactly what he had to do. The City Planning Commission's quarterly technical review was designed to be an exercise in bureaucratic monotony. It was held in a cavernous, wood-paneled auditorium in City Hall, a room that smelled of old paper and weak coffee. Engineers, city officials, and corporate representatives sat in rigid rows, listening to a droning presentation on zoning variances. At a long table at the front of the room sat the commission members, and in the second row, looking comfortable and unassailable, was a delegation from Apex Bridge Corporation, led by a senior executive named Martin Thorne, the very man Clara had identified in her video as her project director. Jack sat in the back, a ghost in a gray suit, the old laptop in a bag at his feet. He felt a strange, cold calm settle over him. He was not here to plead or persuade. He was here to set a fire. He waited for the zoning presentation to conclude. As the chairman shuffled his papers and called for the next item on the agenda, a routine budget approval for Apex's new municipal contract, Jack stood up. "Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the low murmur of the room. 100 heads turned to look at him. The chairman, a portly man with a perpetually annoyed expression, peered over his glasses. "Sir, this is a scheduled hearing. Public comment is not on the agenda at this time." Jack took a step forward into the aisle. "My name is Jack Roberts. My comments pertain directly to the integrity of Apex Bridge Corporation and the tragedy at the Northwood Iron Bridge 5 years ago." A ripple of unease went through the room. Martin Thorne, who had been whispering to a colleague, stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he fixed his gaze on Jack. "That matter was officially closed years ago," Thorne interjected, his voice smooth and dismissive. "This is hardly the time or place to dredge up old tragedies." But the chairman, sensing the sudden sharp shift in the room's atmosphere and seeing the glint in the eyes of the few local press members in attendance, hesitated. "Mr. Roberts," the chairman said, his tone cautious, "you have 2 minutes." It was more than Jack needed. He walked to the front of the room, opened his laptop, and connected it to the room's projector with a cable he had brought for this exact purpose. "I don't need 2 minutes," Jack said, his back to the audience as he clicked a single file. "Clara Rowe does." He turned, and as he stepped away from the podium, Clara's pale, haunted face filled the massive screen behind the commission members. The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The video began to play, Clara's voice, amplified by the auditorium's sound system, echoing off the high ceilings. She spoke of the falsified reports, the substandard steel, the simulations that predicted catastrophic failure. She named Martin Thorne. As his name was spoken, Thorne shot to his feet, his face a mask of purple fury. "This is an outrage! This is unsubstantiated slander from a disgruntled former employee," he shouted. But his voice was drowned out by Clara's, which continued its damning narrative. Security guards started moving toward Jack, but the chairman waved them off, his own face ashen, his eyes glued to the screen. The press members were no longer just watching. They were recording, their phones held high, capturing every second of the corporate implosion. The video showed the schematics, the documents Clara had held up, clear as day on the huge screen. It was an unimpeachable confession from the grave. The climax of the video was her explanation of the crash, of being followed, of her desperate attempt to reach her sister, Sarah. She spoke Sarah's name, and it hung in the air like a final, damning piece of evidence. The video ended, plunging the screen back into the laptop's default blue background. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. It was broken by the frantic clicking of cameras. Jack stood by the podium, not looking at Thorne, but at the faces of the commission members. "The accident that killed my wife wasn't an accident," he said, his voice low, but carrying in the quiet room. "It was the result of a cover-up. The second car, the one the police report conveniently omits, was ensuring Clara Rowe never made it to my house with her evidence. Her death, and my wife's, was the price of their silence." Then Martin Thorne and his legal team were trying to push their way out of the room, but they were now surrounded by reporters shouting questions, a frantic, desperate scrum of bodies and cameras. The aftermath was swift and total. The meeting devolved into chaos. The chairman, banging his gavel to no effect, announced an immediate suspension of all city contracts with Apex and a full, independent investigation into the Iron Bridge disaster. By the time Jack left City Hall, the story was already the lead item on every local news outlet's website. By evening, it was national news. News vans camped outside the Apex headquarters. The headline on the evening paper was stark and brutal. Engineer's posthumous confession implicates Apex in bridge collapse cover-up. They ran a picture of Clara next to one of Sarah, finally connecting their stories. The original falsified police report was leaked, its omissions now glaringly obvious. Sarah's name was finally, publicly, and unequivocally cleared. She was not the victim of a random, tragic accident. She was a casualty of a crime, a woman who had died at the periphery of a battle for the truth that her own sister had been fighting. Jack watched the news reports from his living room, Lily asleep in her room down the hall. He felt no triumph, no elation. He only felt the quiet, profound satisfaction of a promise kept, a story finally told right. The public exposure was complete. Justice, it turned out, was a very bright, very harsh light. 1 year later, the sun cast a warm, golden light on the Northwood Bridge. It was a new bridge, a different bridge, its clean white arches and solid steel beams a testament to lessons learned. The air was calm, carrying the scent of cut grass from the newly landscaped riverbank and the faint, sweet smell of river water. Jack stood at the center of the pedestrian walkway, his hand resting on the smooth, cool metal of the railing. Beside him, Lily, now a confident 8-year-old, stood on her tiptoes, peering down at the gentle current below. The past year had been one of quiet rebuilding, not just for the bridge, but for them. The sensational news stories had faded. The legal proceedings against Apex had resulted in convictions and massive settlements, and the city had moved on. But for Jack and Lily, the change was more profound. His house, once a silent monument to grief, was now filled with the sound of her laughter, her questions, her life. He was no longer just a single father. He was an uncle, a guardian, a family. Lily clutched the old, worn teddy bear, the one that had started it all. Its fur was more matted now, its one remaining eye polished from countless nights of being held. She had been quiet on the drive over, understanding the significance of this place without needing it explained. This was not the dark, rain-slicked iron bridge of their shared past. This was a place of sunlight and second chances. She turned to him, her expression serious. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice small against the vastness of the sky. He nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I'm ready." He watched as she carefully, reverently, placed the teddy bear on the wide, flat top of the railing, positioning it so it faced downriver, a silent passenger on a journey to somewhere new. It looked small and frail against the massive structure. It was a goodbye, and a thank you, an offering to the memory of the woman who had set this all in motion. "Mommy said this place is a new beginning," Lily whispered, her words almost carried away by the breeze. She slipped her small hand into his, and he squeezed it tightly. He looked from the bear to the water, the surface sparkling as if scattered with diamonds. He thought of Sarah, not with the sharp, stabbing pain of loss that had been his constant companion for so long, but with a gentle, bittersweet warmth. Her name had been cleared, her memory honored. The truth had not brought her back, but it had brought a kind of peace, a settling of accounts with the universe. And it had brought him Lily. This child, born of his wife's hidden family, was the most unexpected, most precious legacy Sarah could have ever left him. In saving Clara's daughter, he had inadvertently saved himself. The circle was complete. He was no longer defined by the tragedy that happened here. He was being redefined by the life that had come from it, the small, warm hand he now held in his. He was looking forward, not back. As they stood there, the last rays of the afternoon sun glinted off something in his other hand. He opened his palm. Lying there was the small, silver key from Lily's necklace, the one engraved with Haven 12. This was the final payoff, the ultimate reward. He had kept it, not as a memento of a mystery, but as a reminder of its resolution. The key's meaning had transformed entirely, its purpose beautifully inverted. The circular ending was here. Haven was no longer just the name of an apartment building, a place where a terrible secret had been locked away. It had become the word for his life now. It was the safety and warmth of their home. It was the unspoken trust between him and this little girl who was, in every way that mattered, his daughter. It was the quiet, steady beat of his own healing heart. This key no longer unlocked a door to the past. It was a symbol of the Ben Bin Yen, the peaceful harbor he had finally, truly found. He closed his hand around it, the metal warm from the sun, and with a real, genuine smile, he turned to Lily. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's go home."